the end of January 2018. It's about time that I made a video on cooking with and utilizing some of the corn that I grew out this past season, 2017. All of the corn on the stovetop in front of me is Bronze Beauty Flint that I accessioned from the USDA's Corn Germplasm Collection. And I have shelled out this amount so far, several cups, and I use this sheller. This is the Decker Corn Sheller, Keokuk, Iowa. This looks like it's cast aluminum. I have two of these. I have two other corn shellers, both of which are much larger, large hand crank models. One is a 1 ear at a time, and the other one is a 2 ear at a time, plus a seed sifter, seed cleaner. These ears here, the upper ones, the upper three, are Bronze Beauty Flint. These are really nice examples. They are not what I would call seed ears. At some point I'll do another video where I show some of the seed ears and how I select them out. These are decent ears. In fact, these ears I was able to win the local county fair for best Indian corn with these ears. Additionally, I had some other ears. It wasn't just these three, there were more ears than that, but regardless, this is the level of quality that you can win the fair with, but I still consider these inferior as seed ears go. This ear is actually a Narragansett Indian Flint. This is from several years back. It's just here for the sake of comparison. This is a really classic 8-row, super hard, glassy, pure flint type corn. And this is the type of flint corn that I have experience cooking with. The Bronze Beauty Flint I have no experience cooking with, and we're about to find out what it's like. Some other interesting aspects about this corn. This is the cobs. These are really thin, narrow cobs. They are somewhat thinner than the Narragansett Indian Flint I'm used to. You'll notice that all of them are pigmented to varying degrees. The lightest ones have this grayish tan color, and some of the dark ones like this are almost a purple. These also seem to be very fragile. This first couple of ones here I actually shelled out by hand without using the metal sheller, just using my fingers, and I broke some cobs pretty easily in half. I don't know if this is quite all the way to what I would call a pencil cob trait, but it's pretty close if it isn't already there. And I wanted to demonstrate a little bit too of some of the problems you can find. So this ear, it has some mold on it. It has some splits, and also it has some damage from various types of corn boring or corn eating insects. If the damage level surpasses a certain point, I don't even try to shell these out for human consumption. I just feed these ones to the ducks, geese, etc. and don't bother with trying to eat them. Here's another one that has a combination of mold and then some insect damage. And like I said, if it's beyond a certain level, these two both are past what I would consider threshold for human consumption. I want something for human consumption to be nearly perfect. I'll pick out a few bad kernels, like here's a few bad ones that I could pick out, but I want it to be as close to perfect as reasonably possible. This one is pretty darn near to perfect. I don't really see any bad on that at all. A couple, but it's really minimal. This is what I'd ideally like to use for eating, something along the lines of that, which actually this is a beautiful ear of corn. The other thing I wanted to mention is, as I was shelling out this corn, I found 3 kernels on one of the cobs that I think were pollinated by my Chuspi Peruvian corn, based on the fact that they have the, it's hard to see here maybe, but there's a little bit of purple speckling on the seed coat, which I've never seen before in any corns, and I noticed it on the ears that were closest to the Caillou Chuspi corn in any case. Some of them it's a lot more pronounced and more obvious than this, especially on the lighter colored kernels. Some ones I marked to save seed of. This one I hadn't marked. This was just one that I had set aside for eating, but I saw those three and I pulled them out individually to save. This effect of corn kernels that you can see crosses in the initial generation, that's called Xenia. There's a really good video by Oxbow Farms that I will link in the description that goes into some great detail about the mechanics physically of how Xenia works, both within the structure of the kernel and genetically. But it's a great aspect about corn that allows you to identify crosses very readily. I'm going to try to show the process of grinding this corn into something you can use as a flour with a Corona type hand mill. This is actually not the appropriate proper use for a Corona mill. These should be used for wet grinding of nixtamalized corn. However, I have used it to do this type of grinding even of hard flint corn, but I will admit that it's difficult. It's a pain, literally a pain, and it takes a while, but I will demonstrate the process. Right now I have the burrs split pretty far apart, so we're basically just cracking the corn on the first pass. So I'll give it a little demonstration. At this point, it's not a tremendous effort to do this. We're just cracking the corn. So I'm going to run this through, and then I will show you how we do it all the way. Okay, so we're on to the second pass now. I've set the burrs much closer together, and now what we're doing is essentially getting a coarse grind, or more of a finely cracked corn. The first time the corn that was cracked was more or less just split in half. Maybe this is closer to like a commercial cracked corn for birds. And I'll see if I can do a demonstration and still hold the phone. At some point it becomes impossible because it takes two hands to twist the handle of this thing. It's not insanely difficult at this point, but it's certainly far more difficult than it was before to get this to grind. But you can see it's coming out a lot finer than the first pass. Mostly split in half or still intact. Second pass, cracked corn. It's time for round 3. So this is what we're looking at after 2 passes. Basically cracked the corn, got the burrs tightened down a little more, got a nice bowl here of cracked corn. See if I can still crank it with one hand and show you what it looks like as it comes out. It's just a little finer. It's still pretty coarse though. It's maybe somewhere between extremely coarse grits and really finely cracked corn. If I had to make an observation though at this point, I would say that the Bronze Beauty Flint grinds significantly easier using a Corona mill than what the Narragansett Indian Flint, Rhode Island White Cap, King Philip, these sort of classic New England flints, which is most of my experience, is those are absolutely harder to grind than this. And I don't know if that's good or bad for this, but this is a little easier to grind. Well, we are about to start the 4th pass as we keep gradually refining our grind here. This is significantly tighter and I expect it to get significantly harder to crank, but let's see what I can do here. Oh yeah. a lot harder now. I'm probably gonna have to stop recording to do this, but you can see it's coming out a lot finer. Yeah, it's gonna take 2 hands to make this work, so I'll have to stop this and just show you the end results. This is going to be the final pass for this guy. I think this is the 5th time through. I haven't tightened a burr since the last time. I'm just running it through again. It's not too bad to crank it that way. You can see that the fineness of the grind now is about like commercial grits or maybe coarse cornmeal. It's not too bad. The whole grinding process took me about 20 minutes. It's a pretty good workout. Had to lose my sweatshirt and I'm pretty flushed and sweaty now. Guess gives you a lot of respect for your ancestors and the hard work they had to do to feed themselves. This is not a joke. Grinding corn by hand is not a joke. It's hard stuff. But the whole house smells like fresh ground cornmeal, so that's pretty nice. You can get a feel for what I've got here. Several pounds, I would say. It's a nice mixing bowl full. If I had to guess, I'd say there's, it could be as much as 6 or 8 pounds. This is pretty solid. So, pretty respectable. Heavy stuff. Flint corn is heavy stuff. Bronze Beauty Flint cornmeal. Round 2 for tonight is Cherokee white flour corn. So these are pretty pathetic examples of Cherokee white flour. These are ones that were not so terrible that I just threw them away or fed them to the animals. But they're certainly not seed grade ears. I think these are okay for eating, so I'm going to shell these out and then we'll do a demonstration of grinding these. I'd like to compare the ease of grinding the white flour versus the Bronze Beauty Flint. I've never ground a pure flour corn before, so we'll see how they stack up in terms of grinding and the fineness of the flour. I'm starting the grinding process now for the Cherokee white flour corn, and so far it is a lot easier, but to be fair, this is the first pass and I'm grinding it rather coarsely, but I'll show you the whole process as I did before. I've started the second pass of the Cherokee white flour and it's still remarkably easy to grind. And yet another pass. It's starting to have some resistance to it, but it's still not terribly difficult, and I suspect I can still turn it with one hand. Yes, and it's not even that bad. This is immensely easier to grind than the flint corn. This is easier to grind than the softer types of sorghum, even for sure. This is very, very easy to grind. Not a tremendous amount of effort. There's some effort being exerted here, but it isn't significant, honestly. You can see the flour is coming out pretty fine now. It definitely feels a lot finer. It looks finer than the flint corn flour. The final grind of the white flour corn, the Cherokee white flour, did require 2 hands and was very strenuous. However, the end product is extremely fine textured. It's much finer textured than any cornmeal I've ever seen. I don't want to say that it's as fine as commercial wheat flour, But I would think that if I was to make the effort to really sift this, run it through a flour sifter, I bet you I could get something that's almost as fine as commercial wheat flour. It's not far from it. It's much, much finer than any kind of flint corn I've ever done. And only the final grind was strenuous or required 2 hands. And I know I lost track of the number of passes through, but I know it was at least 1 less than the Bronze Beauty Flint. So I would say that this whole process here maybe took me 10 minutes, and it was more like 20 minutes to half an hour for the flint corn. This is a much less strenuous process, and it takes a lot less time, and it results in a much finer flour. Get a close up on that. And of course there's still grit in it. It's corn flour, right? But it's nice looking, nice fine flour. Cherokee white flour corn. Here is a brief side-by-side comparison of the 2 flours. The left-hand bowl is the Bronze Beauty Flint, the right-hand bowl is Cherokee white flour. So you can see this is quite coarse. It's rather fine. The other interesting observation is, although certainly there's a little bit more volumetrically of the Bronze Beauty Flint, it's dramatically heavier. It's easily twice as heavy, and it's not twice as much by volume. It might be half again as much, third again as much. This is a very light, very, very light, fluffy flour. This stuff is like rock dust. This is unbelievably heavy for the volume it contains. This feels more like commercial white flour. This feels more like sugar. Like if you imagine sugar in a bowl, the heft of that, and then white flour. You get an idea of the weight I'm talking about here. So I don't know if this means this has more nutritional power or it just has a bunch of stuff that you can't digest. Don't know, but there's certainly more to it. This is a heavy corn. This is a light corn. Bronze Beauty Flint, Cherokee white flour, both corns I grew in my garden 2017 growing season, and both were accessions from USDA germplasm. It's time to cook with these guys and see what we end up with. This is the finished product of the cornbread. On the left is the cornbread made from the Bronze Beauty Flint, and on the right is the cornbread made from the Cherokee white flour. Close up here a little more. That's the Bronze Beauty Flint, and this is the Cherokee white flour. You can already tell without even cutting it or tasting it that the Cherokee white flour is much closer to what your typical cornbread would end up being. Just looks, smells, feels closer. This is a real coarse product. This is an odd recipe, just so it's understood. The recipe here is there's no wheat flour in this recipe. This is Carol Deppe's Universal Skillet Cornbread recipe, and I've made this before and it turns out okay. My major complaint, which might be my fault, is that these are more like giant cookies or pancakes. I don't ever get any rise out of this stuff, regardless of what I do. Although I do wonder if perhaps if I just either increase the quantity or decrease the size of the skillet, if it would work better. This is the skillet that I use. It's a pretty big skillet, and I'm not positive I have a smaller one, honestly. So I might have to just make a half again larger recipe and pour in here and see if I can get it a little thicker. But in any case, once I try these, when they've cooled down, I can offer my review of the relative merits of the taste and texture of these cornbreads. But there we go, finished product. Started with ears of corn and we ended up with cornbread in one evening. it's time that we wrapped up the corn cooking comparison of varieties and comparison of recipes, methodologies here that we're using to cook and prepare corn that we grew ourselves, processed ourselves this year and last year. All of the recipes and techniques, both for growing, processing, cooking the corn, come from this book, The Resilient Gardener by Carol Deppe. I'm not going to give you the recipes or even link you to them. You should go and buy this book. If you're the kind of person who has any interest in watching these videos, you should have this book. It's a great book. If I was only going to offer people one gardening book to have at this point, this is probably it. Go buy the book. Now, so let's go through here and explain this. First of all, this is our cornbread. This is using the universal Skillet Cornbread recipe, which I have made many times before, but I've usually used the northern flints, and I've used, generally speaking, pure white. Maybe a few red kernels here and there, but it's basically white kernels. In the book, Carol Deppe claims to detect significant differences in the corn flavor based on the color of the corn. I'm going to be honest here, I can't detect that whatsoever. I have a theory that the author of the book is what I would call a super taster. I am certainly not that. I am just a regular guy, and honestly, it all tastes the same to me, basically. I don't detect any difference between Narragansett Indian Flint and this Bronze Beauty Flint corn. Bronze Beauty Flint is on the right. I mixed about 6 varieties of color into this, ground them all together, and it tastes exactly like the Narragansett Indian Flint corn that I've made, which is basically pure white. So that's for what it's worth. Your mileage, of course, may vary depending on your nuances of flavor. I'm not necessarily a flavor nuance person. I do my best to describe these things, but that's not so much my strong point, shall we say. Cornbread here on the left is the Cherokee white flour corn. This is, I would say, almost infinitely superior. This is basically comparable to a commercial cornbread. If you would buy cornmeal and make cornbread, the flavor, the aroma, the texture is nearly identical to that. It's quite good. I'm really surprised that you can grow something and grind it yourself and get results this good. This is the Bronze Beauty. This is edible and you can eat it, although I have to be honest, I don't really enjoy it, and I think nobody in my family particularly enjoys this. It's extremely coarse. It doesn't even taste like normal corn. It just is odd tasting. It's sort of like eating ground up popcorn or something. It's just strange. So if I had the choice here on out, I would never make cornbread out of flint corn again, and I would only use flour corn. Flour corn makes an extremely superior product. The texture is finer, the flavor is much better, the color is better, the smell is better, it holds together better. It's essentially infinitely better product. I would much rather eat this, and so would everybody else. Now, as an additional method of comparison, using this Bronze Beauty Flint, we also made this big slab of polenta, and I used the Resilient Gardener's recipe for quick cooking polenta, which supposedly requires a pure flint corn of certain types, and it can be made with only 7 minutes of stirring, 45 minutes of sitting. I definitely lack the nuance to tell whether this is good or not. The book basically says the difference between the quick cooking and the slow cooking polentas is not that one is not done or is done, it's that the author detects differences in the flavor, that the slow cooking ones taste uncooked. Based on the other comments that I've said about the color, flavor nuances, there's no way that I can tell personally whether this tastes cooked or uncooked. It just tastes like corn mush or polenta to me. And honestly, I don't know that it tastes any different than if I bought a bag of cornmeal at the store and made mush. So I also want to add that I grew up eating grits and mush, both which are, as much as someone wants to argue this, they're basically the same thing as polenta, and trying to say that one thing is different than the other, you're really splitting hairs here. Polenta is the class prejudice version of mush, which is what I grew up with, which is this, which is basically just grits poured in a loaf pan and cooled, and then you fry it in butter, bacon grease, and put some syrup on it. But the ideas are pretty similar. But in any case, getting back to the Bronze Beauty Flint, this is definitely better as the grits, mush, polenta, whatever you want to call it, the boiled porridge. Much better texture. The flavor is not terribly strong. It's a pretty mild, neutral flavor. I mean, it's not too far off from something like, rice. It's really not a strong flavor, or even like a strong corn flavor, honestly. This is quite mild. I fried some up in butter yesterday and put maple syrup on it, and it was good. It's far superior to the cornbread. And if I was to do anything with the Flint corn ever again, it would only be doing something like this. I also ate some of it in the point where I would call it grits, and it was good. It was just as good as anything. Now, I know a lot of people will say that this sort of stuff is infinitely better than what they buy at the store. Once again, I think that I lack the ability to detect those kind of nuances. These things, this cornbread or this mush, tastes as good as something I would buy at the store, but I don't claim that it tastes better. I have the satisfaction of growing it myself and making it myself, but I don't have the flavor nuances to say that it tastes better or that it tastes worse. It just, to me, it's comparable, and that has to be good enough. The final item here is a corn pancake. This is kind of comparable to a Johnny cake, although this has a lot of eggs in it, and Johnny cakes that I've made before have no eggs. This is made using the Resilient Gardener's universal corn pancake recipe, but I used the Cherokee white flour corn to make it. The taste and texture of this is nothing like a regular pancake, although you can tell it approximately looks like a regular wheat pancake. It tastes exactly like regular cornbread or a regular corn muffin. It actually is a really good flavor, and this was an easy recipe to make and really fast, and I'd be very inclined to just want to make this if I was going to make something, because it's much easier and much faster to make these pancakes than it is to make the cornbread. Also, there's way less butter in the pancakes as a percentage than what there is in the cornbread, which is, there's a shocking amount of butter, and it almost should be called a corn cookie. It's a little out of control. The pancakes are quite good. I certainly didn't mind them. To me, they just are like cornbread and a little flat patty, but it's quite good. So the overall results here is, I would say that for purposes of making cornbread, a flour corn is infinitely superior to a flint, and this is the first time I've ever grown a flour corn that could give us enough production that we could even make cornbread out of it. This is the first time I've grown an Eastern type flour corn. I've grown the Western types many times, and they're complete failures in our climate. There's too much rain, there's too much humidity, too much wind. They're just terrible. They're a disaster here, and they don't work. Flint corn's much better as a polenta, mush, grits, whatever you want to call it. This is a much better use. And the pancakes are excellent when made from the flour corn. Although I have made Johnny cakes from Flint corn, and Johnny cakes are not too bad actually for Flint corn. It's also not a bad way to produce it. And yeah, this book, Resilient Gardener, highest possible recommendation for the book. And just understand that don't take everything absolutely as the literal gospel truth. This is a basis for you to start working off of. Look at it as general principles, not exact details.
Yes,